My name is Renata Marie Ackefer. I am 31 years old. And the house my mother died in, the one she paid off over 32 years of overnight nursing shifts at Detroit Receiving Hospital, had been used as collateral on 4 separate loans my brother took out without my signature or my knowledge. I found out from a woman named Brenda. Not from Marcus, not from one of my aunts, not from some letter that showed up in my mailbox the way letters show up in movies. From a woman named Brenda who worked the title desk at Great Lakes Title and Escrow on 8 Mile Road and had the specific voice of someone who had been in that chair long enough to stop being surprised by what came across her desk. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon in March 2023, and I was sitting in the dispatch bay at Great Lakes Trucking on East McNichols, not related to the title company, just the same 2 words in a different order, eating a turkey sandwich over a keyboard and watching the board for a driver who was running 40 minutes late out of the Hamtramck yard. She said she needed to verify my ownership interest in the property at 14,812 Ardmore Street, Detroit, Michigan 48,227, before they could finalize the closing scheduled for that Friday. I set the sandwich down. I said, "What closing?" She said there was a cash-out refinance scheduled on the property and my name was on the title as a 50% owner and they could not proceed without my notarized signature or a recorded quitclaim deed already on file with Wayne County. I said I had not signed any quitclaim deed. She said that is what I was afraid you were going to say. There was a pause on her end, about 3 seconds, the kind of pause that comes before something important. She said, "I am going to need you to come in." Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. This is where we share real-life inspired tales of family conflict, betrayal, and the quiet strength it takes to stand your ground. If these stories speak to you, drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. My mother was Dolores Jean Ackefer, born Dolores Jean Harris in Cleveland, Ohio in 1963. She came to Detroit in 1988 with $40 in her wallet and a phone number written on a folded paper for a woman named Sister Paulette at Tabernacle Baptist Church on East Grand Boulevard who helped people find work and housing. She found both. She got her LPN from Wayne County Community College in 1991 while working nights. At Henry Ford Hospital, she passed her boards on the first try. She transferred to Detroit Receiving in 1993, which was a better paying position with union benefits, and she stayed there until a second stroke, smaller than the first, took her off the floor in 2018. She worked at a medical supply company in Dearborn after that, answering phones and processing insurance claims until she died. She bought the house on Ardmore in 1996 for $63,000. It was a brick bungalow on a tree-lined block in the Rosedale Park adjacent neighborhood, 2 bedrooms upstairs, 1 full bath, a kitchen with a window that looked out over the backyard where she planted tiger lilies along the back fence in 1999 because she liked color. She got a 30-year fixed mortgage at 6.8%. She paid every payment on time for all 30 years except for 3 months in 2003 when her water heater failed and her transmission went at the same time, and the mortgage company agreed to a short forbearance. She paid those 3 payments back in extra installments over the following year. She circled the June 2003 payment on her calendar in red marker and wrote the word "done" next to it, and she kept that calendar in the second drawer of her bedroom bureau until she died, in a plastic dry cleaner sleeve, next to a birthday card I had made her in second grade out of construction paper. I know all of this because she told me. She told me most things about money. She sat me down at the kitchen table when I was 15 and explained interest rates and amortization using her own mortgage as the example. She showed me the monthly statements. She said every dollar you pay goes partly to the bank and partly to yours. The part that goes to yours is equity. Do not let anyone take your equity without your full understanding of what you are trading and what you are getting back. She said it like it was a rule, like a safety rule you teach a child the way you teach them to look both ways. Do not let anyone take your equity. She also said a lot of things about Marcus that were softer and harder to parse. Marcus is my brother. He is 3 years older than me, 34 now, and he has always been the kind of person who operates on a different relationship to consequence than other people, not because he is unintelligent. He is not unintelligent. He tests people the way you test a frozen pond, 1 foot first, feeling for where it holds. He tested my mother his whole life and she mostly held. She held past the point where other mothers might have shifted. She held out of love, I believe that fully, but she also held because Marcus has this specific quality that I have spent years trying to name, and the closest I have come is, he makes you feel like if you just hold a little longer, he will turn into who he was supposed to be. He makes you feel like you can see that person already, just barely out of reach. And the only thing standing between him and becoming that person is whether you stay in your corner a little longer. She stayed, she always stayed, and I watched her stay. My father left when I was 6. He left gradually, not dramatically, a slow disappearance over about 8 months until one morning he was not there. I have 3 memories of him and all of them are ordinary. One is him watching a Tigers game in the front room with the volume turned low. One is him eating cereal standing at the counter with his back to the room. One is him carrying grocery bags up the front steps in the cold with his hands full and his shoulders hunched against the wind. I have held those 3 images for 25 years and I have no idea what to do with them. My mother did not talk about him with bitterness. She said once that some people are not built for staying and it is better to find out early than late. I thought about that a lot in the months that followed Brenda's phone call. I thought about it more than I expected to. I drove to Great Lakes Title and Escrow after my shift ended at 3. It is on 8 Mile near Livernois, in a small office building that also houses a tax preparation service and a State Farm insurance agent. Brenda was at the front desk when I came in. She was maybe 55, with reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck and a paper cup of coffee on her desk that she kept repositioning as she talked, moving it from one side of her keyboard to the other like she was solving a small puzzle. She pulled up a file on her computer and turned the monitor toward me. She showed me the recorded quitclaim deed first. It was dated January 14, 2023, and it purported to transfer my ownership interest in the Ardmore property to Marcus Lemont Ackhofer as sole owner. My name was on the signature line. It was not my signature. It was close. Someone had practiced. The T in Ackhofer sat lower than I write it, and the in Renata curved back in a direction mine does not, but if you were not me, if you were a county clerk processing a stack of documents on a Thursday afternoon, you would not necessarily catch it. Brenda moved her coffee to the left side of the keyboard. She said, "The notary stamp on this document is real. The commission is active. The person who stamps it," she pointed at a name in the block, Philip Graves, Wayne County, "has a registered commission expiring March 2025. She said, "I called the county registry when the refinance came in because something about the filing sequence looked off." She said, "Properties do not usually have this many transactions in this short a time unless there is a good reason, and most of the good reasons are bad." She showed me the 4 loan documents. The home equity line of credit for $35,000 from Midwest Fidelity Mortgage, filed February 2022. The private lender note for $20,000 from Lakeshore Capital Partners out of Southfield, filed July 2022. The second private lender note for $15,000 from the same company, filed October 2022. And the proposed cash-out refinance for $62,000, the one that had not happened yet, the one Brenda had frozen when she called me. $70,000 in loans against a house worth $142,000 at the time, a house I co-owned, using signatures that were not mine. She showed me each document and I looked at each one and I did not say anything. I wrote down the recording numbers, the dates, the lender names, and the name of Philip Graves on the back of a gas receipt from my coat pocket. Brenda said she had already notified the lenders that there was a title dispute and the refinance was on hold. She said she was required to file a report with the state. She said, "I am sorry this happened to you." I said, "Thank you for calling me." I sat in my car in the Great Lakes Title parking lot for 22 minutes. I know it was 22 minutes because the radio was on and I heard the same traffic report twice. My hands were in my lap and the heat was running and I was looking at the building across 8 Mile Road, a dollar store with a handwritten sales sign in the window, and I was not thinking about Marcus yet. I was thinking about my mother at the kitchen table in the fall of 2021, 3 weeks before she died, and how she had looked at me over her coffee cup, with the particular expression she used when she was deciding whether to say something and had not yet decided. I had thought at the time she was worried about money. I had thought at the time I should ask her directly. I had not asked her directly because she had seemed tired and I did not want to add to the weight of whatever she was already carrying. I had driven home that Sunday evening and told myself I would ask next week. There was no next week. My mother died on a Saturday afternoon in October 2021. She was 61 years old. She had gone to church that morning, come home, eaten lunch, and sat down in her recliner in the front room to watch the news. Marcus was supposedly at the house that afternoon, supposedly in the kitchen while she was in the front room. He called me at 3:47 p.m., which I know because I was timestamping a FedEx pickup log when my phone went off. He said, "Mom fell." He said, "She is gone," just like that. 2 sentences. No preface. "Mom fell, she is gone." I drove from the dispatch yard on McNichols to the house on Ardmore in 14 minutes, running 2 red lights, and I have never asked myself whether I was right to run them. The will had been written by my mother on legal paper in her own handwriting, signed by her and witnessed by her next-door neighbor Mrs. Evelyn Pruitt and her pastor Reverend Chester Banks of Tabernacle Baptist Church. It was not a complicated document. The house went to me and Marcus equally, 50% each. Her savings account went to a scholarship fund she had established at Osborne High School in honor of a student she had known. Her personal possessions were distributed specifically: the blue vase to Mrs. Pruitt, the nursing textbooks to the community college library, the jewelry to me, with a list she had made in a separate handwritten document that I found in the same envelope as the will. I filed the will with Wayne County Probate Court in November 2021 with the help of a legal aid organization on West Grand Boulevard that helped low-income residents handle estate matters. The house transferred to joint ownership without incident, without any paperwork on my end that I had not signed, without any understanding on my part that anything was already in motion. I should have looked at the property records when the title transferred. Patricia, my attorney, told me that later, not unkindly, the way a doctor tells you what you should have done earlier. In a way that is practical and not accusatory, because knowing what you should have done does not change what happened. I should have checked. I did not check because I trusted the process, I trusted the probate court, and because the idea that Marcus would immediately begin leveraging the house against 4 loans in the 16 months after our mother's burial was a thought that would have required me to know at that time who Marcus really was. I thought I knew who Marcus was. I thought I knew the parts that were good and the parts that were not, and I thought the parts that were not were the kind of not good that hurt only himself: the failed businesses, the unpaid child support to Tamara in East Point, the ways he moved through life always adjacent to responsibility but never quite in it. I did not think the not good reached this far. I did not think it reached into my name. That Tuesday night after Brenda's call, I did not contact Marcus. I drove home to my apartment on Chalmers Street in the East English Village neighborhood, and I made dinner, which was pasta with a jar of sauce and a salad from a bag, and I sat at my kitchen table and ate it, and then I opened my laptop and pulled up the Wayne County Register of Deeds website. It took me the better part of an hour to navigate the interface, which is not built for civilian use, but eventually I found the property search function and I pulled up every recorded document for the address 14,812 Ardmore Street dating from October 2021 forward. I printed what I could print and wrote down what I could not. I filled 4 pages of a green spiral notebook I had been using to track the utility bills I was still paying on the Ardmore property every month: the gas and electric, which I had been paying because Marcus told me he could not afford to contribute, and I had agreed because the alternative was letting my mother's house go dark. I had been paying those utilities for 16 months, every month, while Marcus was drawing down loans against the property. I did not call him. I called my friend Deja Simmons, who I have known since 7th grade at Osborne High School and who works now as a paralegal at a civil litigation firm downtown on Fort Street. I told her the situation in 5 minutes, factually, without editorializing. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love about Deja. When I finished, she said, "Do not call him yet," she said. "Get every document you can get your hands on first." She said she would get me a name. The name was Patricia Holt, a real estate attorney with an office on Woodward Avenue in New Center, 3 blocks from the old Fisher Building, whose practice included real estate fraud and title disputes, and who Deja described as someone who could read a county record the way a doctor reads a scan, seeing things in the data that other people miss. Deja gave me Patricia's number on a piece of yellow legal paper torn from her own pad, sitting at my kitchen table on a Friday night with a glass of wine and the green notebook open between us. I called Patricia the following Monday morning from the dispatch bay before my shift started, standing outside near the loading dock where it was quiet enough to hear and private enough to speak. She picked up herself, which I did not expect. I had expected a receptionist. She said, "Patricia Holt." I told her the situation in 4 minutes, the same way I had told Deja. She asked 3 questions. She asked whether I had a copy of the will and the probate filing. I said yes. She asked whether I had pulled the county records myself. I said yes. She asked whether my brother was currently residing at the property. I said no, he was renting somewhere in Grosse Pointe Woods. She said she would need to see everything I had and she could have a retainer figure for me by end of week. The retainer was $4,200. I had it. I had been keeping it and more in a savings account at Flagstar Bank on East Jefferson that I called my emergency fund when people asked, but that I had built specifically in the back of my mind in the specific shape of Marcus because I had understood for a long time that something involving money would eventually happen. I had understood this the way you understand things you do not let yourself articulate, not consciously, not in words. Just as a practice, a hedge, I saved because saving felt like protection and I did not examine what I was protecting myself against. The $4,200 felt, in that moment, like proof of a knowledge I had carried for years without ever looking it directly in the face. Patricia filed an emergency motion to quiet title in Wayne County Circuit Court in the second week of April 2023. I want to tell you what that means because I did not know what it meant before Patricia explained it to me. A quiet title action is a lawsuit that asks a court to definitively establish who owns a piece of property and in what proportion, and to clear any clouds or conflicting claims from the title record. The emergency part meant she was asking the court to freeze any further transactions on the property while the case was pending. The court granted the freeze within 4 days. No further loans, no sales, no transfers. Nothing could happen to the Ardmore property without the court's approval. Patricia also filed a complaint with the Michigan Department of Insurance and Financial Services about Midwest Fidelity Mortgage and Lakeshore Capital Partners. She sent a certified letter to Philip Graves, the notary whose stamp appeared on all 4 fraudulent documents, notifying him that his commission was being referred to the state licensing board for investigation. She did all of this in 10 days. I sat in her office on Woodward on a Tuesday afternoon, the week after she filed, and she walked me through everything she had done and everything she was going to do. She had a row of small succulents on her windowsill and a framed photo of 2 teenage girls on her desk, and the office smelled faintly of something she had heated up for lunch, something with garlic. I signed documents. I initialed things. I paid the retainer from my phone in the parking garage under her building. A wire transfer from my Flagstar account, the way you pay any bill, just a larger number than most bills. Patricia told me to stop paying the utilities on the Ardmore property. She said it could be used to suggest I was voluntarily contributing to a shared arrangement, and that was not a narrative she wanted in play. I stopped the next day. I did not feel anything about it except a small cold settling near my collarbone that I identified, after a minute, as relief, the specific relief of not having to pretend something was normal anymore. I still had not spoken to Marcus. He found out about the lawsuit when the process server showed up at his apartment on Moros Road in Grosse Pointe Woods on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-April. He called me 47 minutes after being served. I know the time because I was logging a Flint run. His number appeared on my phone and I watched it until it stopped. It appeared again 4 minutes later. I watched it again. The third time I picked up. His voice was not what I expected. I had been bracing for anger, the specific anger of someone who has been caught and pivots immediately to offense. What I got was something different. What I got was the voice he used with our mother, measured, reasonable, already constructing an explanation before the explanation was even needed. He said, "Renata, what is this?" Like it was a question he had every right to ask, like he was mildly confused by the turn of events. I said, "Marcus, I know about all 4 loans." He was quiet for 5 seconds. I counted by watching the second hand on the clock above the dispatch board. He said I was going to pay it all back. I said, "With what?" He said I had a plan. The pressure washing business was picking up. He said, "Renata, Mama would not have wanted this." I set the phone face down on the desk. I did not hang up. I set it face down and went back to the Flint run. He talked into the desk for about 40 seconds and then the call dropped or he hung up, I do not know which. What I thought, in the silence while he was talking into the desk, was a single sentence that sat very still and clear in the middle of everything else. She would not have wanted you to do it either. He left me a voicemail that night, 9 minutes and 42 seconds. I know because I checked the timestamp before I decided whether to listen. I did not listen for 3 days. I listened on a Friday evening sitting in my car in the major parking lot on 8 Mile, waiting for a rainstorm to slow down, rain hitting the roof of the car so hard it blurred the windshield and made everything outside look like it was dissolving. He talked about how hard things had been after she died. He talked about the grief. He said he had not been sleeping, that he had been unable to think clearly, that the house had felt like the only stable thing. He talked about the pressure washing business, how the equipment had broken down in a way that was not his fault, how he had a client lined up who would have covered the loan payments if things had gone differently. He talked about the cell phone repair business he had tried before that and how it had almost worked. He talked about how he thought of himself as the primary heir because he was older, because he had lived in the house longer, because he had been there when she died and I had not been. That last part he paused, and then he said it again differently. He said, "I was there. I held her hand. I was there." I stopped the voicemail. The rain was still coming down. I looked at the major sign through the blurred glass. My jaw had gone tight in a way I could feel going up into my temples and staying there. I was there, he had been in the kitchen. My mother had been alone in the front room in her recliner when the stroke happened. He had found her and called me, and by the time I got there, she had been gone for at least 20 minutes. He had been there in the technical sense. He had been in the building, and he had turned that into a claim. I want to pause here and ask you something because I think this might be familiar to some of you. Have you ever been on the outside of something that you had every right to be on the inside of? Have you ever had someone use your absence, your job, your life in a different city or a different neighborhood as a reason why they should get more than you? Have you ever been told you don't understand or you weren't here or you didn't see it the way I saw it and had that used as a door to shut you out of something that was legally and morally half yours? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time because what happens next is the part I've been building toward this whole time. The discovery process took approximately 5 months. Patricia subpoenaed records from Midwest Fidelity Mortgage and from Lakeshore Capital Partners. She subpoenaed Philip Graves, the notary. She hired a forensic document examiner named Dr. Constance Faber, who had been an expert witness in Wayne County courts for 19 years, to analyze the signatures on all 4 fraudulent documents and prepare a written opinion. Dr. Faber's opinion was 11 pages. I read every word. Her conclusion was that all 4 signatures were produced by the same person imitating the style of the genuine signer, that the imitation showed evidence of practice and preparation, and that the discrepancies between the fraudulent signatures and my authentic signature were consistent and reproducible, suggesting they were not accidental or the result of natural variation, but rather the result of a learned copy that had settled into its own slightly different form. She noted specifically the T in Akafir, the R in Renata, and a particular way I join my A to the following letter that the forger had not captured. She said in her professional opinion the fraudulent signatures were made by someone who had access to genuine examples of my handwriting, possibly photocopies or scanned copies of documents I had signed, and who had practiced until the copy was close but not perfect. Someone who had access to genuine examples of my handwriting. I thought about that for a long time. I thought about every document that had ever passed between me and Marcus. Birthday cards I had signed and sent, a handwritten note I had left on the kitchen counter at the Ardmore house after I stopped by in December 2021, 3 months after my mother died, to check on the heat and water, a Christmas card in 2020. My signature was not unusual or distinctive in ways that would be hard to copy. It was a practical signature. But someone had to have looked at it long enough to practice. The deposition of Philip Graves took place in Patricia's conference room on a Wednesday morning in June 2023. He came in a cardigan with a small American flag pin on the lapel and sat down like a man who had been told this was a formality. He was 71 years old with the careful movements of someone whose joints had opinions about the weather. Patricia's investigator, a woman named Carolyn who had been a paralegal for 30 years before moving into investigative work, had already done a background session with him that gave Patricia the shape of what she needed. Patricia asked him to describe his notarization practice. He said he worked out of his home in Harper Woods. He charged $15 per signature. He mostly served the surrounding neighborhoods. Patricia asked whether he typically required supporting identification documentation for the signees. He said he usually asked for ID. Patricia asked whether he had asked for ID when he notarized the 4 documents bearing my name. He was quiet. He moved the glass of water on the conference table about an inch to the left. He said Marcus had told him the co-owner was his sister and she had signed everything ahead of time and he just needed the official stamp. Patricia asked whether he had verified this independently. He said he had not. Patricia asked whether this was his standard practice. He said sometimes people got impatient when you asked too many questions. Patricia had a folder open on the table in front of her and she had not looked at it once. She looked at Philip Graves and said, "Mr. Graves, in how many transactions in the past 6 years would you estimate that you notarized documents without verifying all parties were present and consenting?" Philip moved the water glass back to the right. He said he could not be certain. Patricia said, "Our investigation has identified 61 transactions involving your commission stamp in the past 6 years in which the property records show discrepancies consistent with fraudulent authorization." She waited. She let that number sit in the room. Philip Graves's hands on the table were very still. He said, "I never knew anyone was getting hurt." Patricia said, "I understand," and then she moved to the next question. After the deposition, I walked down the stairs from Patricia's building onto Woodward Avenue and stood on the sidewalk in the July heat for a few minutes. The street was loud. delivery trucks and a bus going by and someone's music from an upper window. I stood there until my breathing settled back to normal, and then I walked to my car in the parking structure across the street and drove back to work. My colleague Kevin, who has managed the dispatch floor at Great Lakes Trucking for 22 years and wears rotating colors of New Balance 990s and has never once asked me a personal question in 3 years of working together, looked up when I came back in and said, "You good?" I said yes. He said, "The Kalamazoo run is 40 minutes out and there's a pickup in Flint that came in while you were gone." I said, "I'll take it." He slid the folder across the board to me and went back to what he was doing. That is the kind of colleague Kevin is. He did not need to know where I had been or why I had been late or what was happening in my life. He needed me to take the Flint pickup. I took it. Marcus retained an attorney in late May named Walter Briggs, whose office was in the New Center neighborhood on 2nd Avenue, 3 floors up in a building that had a malfunctioning elevator, according to Deja, who had been in the building once for an unrelated matter. Deja described Walter Briggs as a competent attorney in the way that a mid-range car is a competent vehicle. It will get you there, but you know going in that there are better options and that the better options cost more. Marcus apparently had not paid Briggs in full and was on a payment arrangement, which Deja knew because these things circulate in the legal community the way everything circulates in a community once you know where to listen. Walter Briggs filed a response to Patricia's quiet title motion in early June. The response argued that Marcus had a reasonable belief that he had the right to manage the property given that he had been a long-term resident and primary caregiver, and that any title documentation issues were the result of administrative errors rather than intentional fraud. Patricia read me this response over the phone. She read it with a flatness in her voice that I recognized as the professional equivalent of contempt. She said, "This is not a strong argument." I said, "I know." She said, "I am going to enjoy the hearing." The hearing was scheduled for the second week of September 2023 at the Frank Murphy Hall of Justice on St. Antone Street in downtown Detroit. Frank Murphy is one of those courthouse buildings that carries its age honestly. The corridors have the smell of a room where decisions have been made for a long time, something between old paper and institutional cleaning solution, and the particular cold of high ceilings. Courtroom 507 is on the 5th floor. The elevator was working that day, which felt like a small mercy. I wore a navy blazer over a white shirt and black pants, the same combination I wear to any professional setting where I need to be taken seriously without performing the act of being taken seriously. Patricia was already at the plaintiff's table when I arrived, her leather portfolio open, her pen clicking twice at the end of each completed page of notes. She looked at me when I sat down and said, "You look good." I said, "Thank you." She clicked the pen again and went back to her notes. Marcus came in with Walter Briggs about 4 minutes before the scheduled start. Marcus was wearing a dark suit that I had seen before. He had worn it to our mother's funeral, and for a second when he walked in and the light from the corridor was behind him, I saw the shape of his face the way I have always seen it, the face of my brother, and my chest did a thing I was not prepared for. A single involuntary contraction, and then it stopped and I looked back at the table. He sat down across the room and did not look at me. Judge Sandra Watkins took the bench at exactly the scheduled time. She is a small woman with reading glasses and a quality of stillness that comes from 17 years of presiding over contested proceedings, a stillness that is not passive but concentrated, all her attention directed exactly where she points it. She reviewed the filed documents. She asked Patricia 2 questions about the forensic document analysis. She asked Walter Briggs 1 question about the basis for his administrative error argument. His answer was not technically wrong, but it was not built on much, and Judge Watkins looked at him for a moment after he finished the way you look at something that has explained itself as thoroughly as it is capable of being explained. She did not take long. She granted the quiet title motion. She voided all 4 fraudulent liens on the record. She ordered the forged quitclaim deeds stricken from the Wayne County property records. She confirmed ownership of the property at 14,812 Ardmore Street at 50% Renata Marie Ackafer and 50% Marcus Lemont Ackafer, joint tenancy, with a recorded court order requiring independent notarized consent from both parties for any future transactions. She referred the matter of Philip Graves to the State Notary Licensing Board and to the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office for Criminal Investigation. She made a finding on the record that the documentation in this case was consistent with a pattern of real estate fraud requiring further investigation by state financial regulators. Walter Briggs did not object to anything. He made one small note on his legal pad. Marcus sat very still with his hands on the table in front of him and did not look up. Patricia gathered her portfolio. She did not smile. She said quietly, "That's done." I said yes. Midwest Fidelity Mortgage filed a civil suit against Marcus the following week to recover the $35,000. Lakeshore Capital Partners had already initiated recovery proceedings in August, before the hearing, against both loans totaling $35,000 more. The combined civil judgment exposure for Marcus was $70,000 plus interest and legal fees. Patricia estimated the total could reach $88,000 by the time all proceedings concluded. She said those numbers would follow him on his credit record and in any future property transaction until they were fully satisfied. She said this not with pleasure, not with cruelty, just with the neutral precision of someone reporting a forecast. Philip Graves lost his notary commission in November 2023. The Wayne County Prosecutor's Office opened a criminal investigation, and as of February 2024, when Patricia last updated me, charges were still pending. Patricia's total bill over the entire matter came to $11,400. She took $500 off because the hearing had moved faster than she had initially projected. I paid it in 3 installments. It was the most money I had spent on anything other than my car, which was a 2016 Kia Forte I had bought in 2020 from a private seller in Dearborn for $9,200. I paid the third installment in January 2024. That same week, I went back to Ardmore. I want to tell you about the bureau because I have been carrying it this whole time and I need to put it down. My mother's bedroom bureau was a piece of furniture she had bought from an estate sale in Palmer Park in 2004. She had driven there on a Saturday morning after seeing the sale listed in the Detroit Free Press, and she came back with the bureau in a rented truck that Marcus and a neighbor named Darnell Jackson helped carry up the front steps. It was dark walnut with brass hardware, 6 drawers, a tall mirror framed in the same walnut attached at the back. The third drawer handle from the top on the left side had broken in 2008 or 2009. She could never remember exactly. The screw backing had stripped, and she had said for years she was going to fix it. She never fixed it. To open that drawer, you had to grip the bottom edge of the drawer face with your fingertips and pull, using your nails along the lip. In the second drawer, she kept the mortgage calendar from 2003 in a plastic dry cleaner sleeve. Next to the calendar, she kept a birthday card I had made her in second grade from red and green construction paper, written inside in the unsteady letters of a 7-year-old. I love you, Mama, and illustrated with something that was supposed to be a tiger lily but looked more like a yellow star. She had kept that card for 24 years. When I found it after her death, it was soft along the folds from being handled so many times. After the final installment to Patricia cleared, I drove to Ardmore on a Saturday in January, a cold gray day with ice patches on the side streets and a sky the color of pavement. I had a key. I had always had a key. I let myself in the front door and stood in the front hallway for a minute just standing. The house was empty. Marcus had never been living there. The only person who had ever stayed was my mother, and she had been gone for more than 2 years, and the house had the specific quality of a place where someone used to be, not sad exactly, more like a room holding its breath. It smelled like cold radiator metal and old carpet, and very faintly, in a way that was probably my memory more than anything real, like the community roast coffee from the Red Can she bought at the Save lot on Fenkel. I walked to the kitchen first because that is where I always went in that house. The counter was clean. The coffee maker she had kept on the counter for 15 years was gone. Marcus had probably taken it, and without it the counter looked wide and unfamiliar. I stood there for a moment. I looked out the window at the backyard. The tiger lilies were buried under 2 months of dead winter growth, but the stems from last summer were still there, dry and brown along the back fence, and in the spring they would come back the way they came back every spring whether anyone looked at them or not. I went to the bedroom. The bureau was still there. It had not moved. The broken handle was still broken. I opened the second drawer and the calendar was there in its plastic sleeve and the construction paper card was there next to it, and I stood at the bureau for a long time with my hands on the drawer edges, just standing there. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, which had the blue and white church sale quilt pulled tight across it the way my mother always made it, and I held the calendar in my lap and I looked at that red circle around the June 2003 mortgage payment and I thought about the Sunday morning she made it. I was 17. I was at the kitchen table eating cereal and she came in from the living room where the calendar was hung on a nail by the door, and she had the red marker from the junk drawer and she stood at the counter and circled that box and wrote the word done in letters. She pressed into the paper hard enough that the calendar was slightly dented on the back. She said, "Baby, do you know what this means?" I said, "The house is paid off." She said, "That's right." She clicked the marker cap back on and put it on the counter and got herself a cup of coffee, and stood there looking out the window for a while with the cup in both hands, and I sat at the table and ate my cereal and did not understand yet that this moment was one of the ones I would carry. I do not know what my mother knew about what Marcus was capable of. I do not know if she had a suspicion she never named. I do not know if the look she had given me that Sunday 3 weeks before she died over her coffee cup, the look that said she was deciding whether to say something, I do not know if that was about him. I will never know. That is the thing about the dead that no one warns you about enough. They do not leave explanations. They leave bureaus and calendars and construction paper cards and the specific way a house smells in January when it has been empty all winter, and you have to build the meaning yourself from what they left. I put the calendar back in the plastic sleeve. I put the card next to it. I closed the second drawer. I turned off the light in the bedroom and walked back through the house, turning off lights as I went, the way she used to do at night, checking each room, front room, hallway, kitchen. I stood in the kitchen one more time and looked out the window at the backyard, and then I went out the front door and locked it behind me. I drove to work. I had the afternoon shift that Saturday, 4 to midnight, the board light on weekends, but someone has to be there. Kevin was not working. It was a junior dispatcher named Andre, 23 years old and still learning the Flint routes. I sat down at the board and took a quick look at what was pending and found him a solution for a stuck pickup in Ann Arbor, and we worked through the evening without talking much, which was fine, which was exactly right. Marcus and I have not spoken since the courtroom. I have not sought that conversation. I am not certain I want it. There are things I would say if I had it, and there are things I would not say, and I have not yet decided which list is longer. What I know is that the property at 14,812 Ardmore Street, Detroit, Michigan 48,227, is worth approximately $218,000 based on an appraiser's comparative market analysis from December 2023, which Patricia sent me as an update. Whatever Marcus and I decide to do with that property eventually, that decision will require both our signatures in person in front of an independent notary who has verified we are who we say we are. That is what the court records say. That is what they will keep saying. The tiger lilies will come up in May along the back fence whether we decide anything or not. The bureau with the broken handle is in the bedroom with the calendar in the second drawer. My mother paid off that house for 32 years and circled the last payment in red. And wrote done, and now I have the piece of paper that says it stays that way. I went to work the day after the hearing. I was on the floor at 7:45, the same time I am always on the floor. Kevin looked up from the board when I came in and said, "How'd it go?" I said, "We won." He said, "Good." Then he pointed at the board and said, "There's a Lansing run backed up from last night and a Flint situation coming in at noon." I pulled the Lansing folder. I started dispatching trucks. That is where it ends. Not in a conversation I have not had yet, not in a reconciliation I am not ready for, not in a ceremony. It ends in a dispatch bay on the east side of Detroit with fluorescent lights and a board full of runs and Kevin in his New Balance sneakers and my coffee going cold on the edge of the desk. My mother's house is still on Ardmore. The tiger lilies come up every year. The third drawer handle on the left side of the bureau is still broken. I am going to fix it one day. I am going to drive out there on a Saturday with a screwdriver and a replacement screw, and I am going to fix the handle on that drawer. I have been saying I was going to do it for a while now, and I have not done it yet, but I will. Some things take their time. The important thing is that the drawer is still there and the calendar is in it and the house is still ours. Half mine and half Marcus's, whether he has earned it or not, and the court record says so, and there is nothing in this world he can do about that without my signature and my consent, freely and clearly given, to a notary who will look me in the face and ask if this is truly what I want. It is, or it will be when I am ready, and when I am ready I will sign. I want to go back and tell you about the conversation I had with my Aunt Cynthia because it matters, and I have not told it yet. Aunt Cynthia is my mother's older sister, 64 years old, a retired schoolteacher from Inkster who drives a tan Buick LeSabre and still wears her hair in the same style she wore it in her school photos from 1978. She and my mother were close the way sisters are close when they have survived the same childhood. Not always in agreement, not always comfortable, but with a shared vocabulary of experience that nobody outside the family has access to. Cynthia was at the house the week after my mother died, helping with the arrangements, sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee and answering the phone. When people called to express condolences, Marcus was there too and I was there, and the three of us moved around that kitchen like planets in an orbit that had been disrupted. Cynthia pulled me aside on the second day while Marcus was on the phone in the front room and she said, "You know he's going to need help." I said, "I know." She said, "Your mother worried about him a lot at the end." I said, I know that too. She said, you might need to be patient with him. I looked at the kitchen counter where my mother's coffee maker sat. I said, Aunt Cynthia, I have been patient with Marcus my whole life. She looked at me. She moved her coffee cup a half inch to the left. She said, I know you have, baby. She said it quietly, like an acknowledgement, not like an argument. Then Marcus came back in from the front room and the conversation stopped. I thought about that moment a lot in the months that followed. The way she moved the cup, the way she said, I know you have, there was something in it that I could not name at the time and that I think I understand better now, which is that Cynthia had known what Marcus was capable of longer than I had. She had watched my mother watch Marcus, and she had known, in the way that older sisters know things about the people they grew up with, that some knowledge is just grief dressed in different clothes. She had said, be patient. She had not said, trust him, there is a difference. I called Cynthia in May 2023 after Patricia had filed the motion but before the hearing, when the shape of everything was clear but nothing was resolved yet. I called her on a Sunday evening. She picked up after 2 rings. I told her everything. She was quiet through most of it. When I finished, she did not say she was shocked. She did not perform surprise. She said, I was afraid it was going to be something like this. I said, you knew? She said, I did not know I was afraid. There is a difference. She said she had noticed that Marcus had started driving a different car around Christmas 2021, about 6 weeks after the funeral. She said she had noticed new sneakers and a new phone at Easter 2022. She said she had wondered. She had not asked. She had told herself she was being uncharitable. She said, Renata, I am sorry I did not say something sooner. I said, Aunt Cynthia, you did not know. You said you were afraid. Being afraid of something does not mean you have to act on the fear. She was quiet for a second. She said, your mother would have been very proud of you. She said it simply, the way you say things that are just true and do not need decoration. I said, thank you. Then we talked for another 20 minutes about other things, her grandson who had just started kindergarten, a problem with her furnace that a neighbor had helped her fix, a bakery on Michigan Avenue in Dearborn that she had discovered and was working her way through the entire menu. We talked about things that had nothing to do with Marcus and everything to do with the life that was still ongoing around the edges of all of this. I did not tell Cynthia every detail of the court process as it happened. I did not want her to feel like a spectator to something that was painful and that she could not change. I called her after the hearing and I told her it was done and the house was protected. She said, good. She said, that is what Dolers would have wanted. I said, I know. She said, fix that handle on the drawer by the way your mother always meant to. I said, I know I will. She said, stop saying you will and go do it. I said, yes, ma'am. She laughed, a short, real laugh, and then we said goodbye. I want to tell you about Kevin's. I mentioned Kevin already, my supervisor at Great Lakes Trucking, the one with the New Balance sneakers. Kevin's full name is Kevin Alonzo Marsh, and he has been dispatching freight on the east side for 22 years, and he has an ex-wife in Ferndale and a daughter at University of Michigan Ann Arbor who he talks about on Fridays when things are slow. He is not a man who involves himself in the personal lives of the people he works with. He does not ask, he does not comment. He treats the dispatch floor like a machine that runs best when everyone is doing exactly their designated function, and he is the same way toward the people in it. But Kevin notices things. He noticed when I started coming in a few minutes earlier in the spring of 2023. He noticed when I started eating lunch at my desk instead of in the break room. He noticed the day I came back late from the deposition with Philip Graves, and he noticed that I was not in the habit of being late. He said nothing about any of this. He handed me whatever needed handling and moved on. The day I came in after the hearing, a Thursday in September, he was already at the board when I arrived. He looked up. He said, how'd it go? I said, we won. He said, good. He pointed at the Lansing backup. I took it. We worked the whole shift without talking about it again. About 3 weeks later, on a Friday afternoon when the board was light and Andre was handling the last Kalamazoo run and Kevin and I were both at our stations with not much left to do, Kevin said, without looking up from whatever he was reading, you know, my cousin had something similar happen to him. Out of nowhere, just a statement dropped into the quiet of the dispatch bay like a key on a counter. I said, yeah. He said, yeah. He said not property, money out of an account, but same kind of thing, same kind of family. He said his cousin had to take someone to court too. I said, did it work out? He said, mostly. He said these things never work out all the way, they just work out enough to get back to normal. I thought about that for a few days, works out enough to get back to normal. I turned that phrase over in my head the way you turn over something you find in a pocket, testing the weight, trying to identify the material. I decided it was right, not satisfying, but right. The house was protected. The court record was clear. The fraud was documented and referred to the appropriate authorities. Marcus would face consequences from the lenders regardless of anything I did or did not do. My mother's equity was not erased. That was enough. That was the version of enough that was available to me. Normal for me looked like this: weekday mornings at the dispatch bay at 7:45, coffee from the Coney Island on McNichols that I stop at on the way in, $2.50 for a large, which is the right price for the right cup of coffee. The board is a large monitor that shows every active route and every driver and every pickup and delivery scheduled for the day, color coded by status. Green is on time, yellow is at risk, red is a problem. I spend my days moving things from yellow to green and keeping the reds from getting worse. I am good at this. I have been good at this for 9 years, and I know I am good at it the way you know things about yourself that are just facts, not compliments. I can read a stalled route and find the fix in the time it takes other dispatchers to open the notes file. Marcus took something from me that was not his to take. He used my mother's equity, which was my equity too, which was the 32 years of her night shifts and her forbearance agreement. And her red-circled calendar. He forged my name with a practiced hand. He found a notary who asked no questions. He borrowed $70,000 and spent it on things that did not work and some things that I will never know, and he did it while calling our mother every Sunday and bringing her flowers from Eastern Market and sitting in that kitchen making her laugh until she had to hold her stomach. These two things were both true at the same time. I have stopped trying to make one of them erase the other. They are both there and they will both always be there, and what I have done is put them next to each other in a place where they cannot do anything to the current accounting. The current accounting is, the house is mine half and my brother's half and neither of us can touch it without the other. The fraudulent documents are stricken from the record, the notary lost his commission. The lenders are pursuing Marcus through their own legal channels for recovery of the full 70,000 plus interest. The property is worth $218,000 in the current market. My mother's calendar is in the second drawer of her bureau. Her tiger lilies will be up in 3 months. And I am at the dispatch board at 7:45 on Monday morning moving things from yellow to green. There is one more thing I want to say. It is about the day I called Patricia to pay the final installment and she told me it was complete. She told me the court order had been recorded with the county, the stricken documents were noted in the official property history, everything that needed to happen in the legal record had happened. She said, "Renata, this is done." I said, "Thank you, Patricia." She said it was a clean case. She said you had everything documented. You knew what you had before you walked in. I said I had a green notebook. She said sometimes that is exactly what it takes. I hung up and sat in my car in the parking structure on Woodward for a few minutes, the same parking structure where I had paid her retainer from my phone 8 months earlier. It was cold. January cold, the particular cold of downtown Detroit in January that gets into the parking structures through the concrete and sits there. I had the heat running. I was thinking about my mother at that kitchen table in 1993 when I was 5 years old. Not old enough to understand what she was explaining, but old enough to be in the room. And she was going over her nursing school application paperwork, organized in piles on the table by category, and she was humming something low under her breath while she worked, not a song I recognized, just a sound. A working sound, a sound that said, "This is what I am doing and I am not stopping." I am not stopping either. I put the car in drive. I drove back to the east side. I had a 4 o'clock shift and there were trucks to dispatch and routes to watch and things that needed moving from yellow to green. I parked in the lot. I went inside. I sat down at the board. I put my coffee next to the keyboard and I pulled up the afternoon routes and I started working. That is who I am. That is who my mother made me. And that is not something my brother could put on a fraudulent document, no matter how long he practiced the signature. I have been thinking about what my mother would say if she could see how this ended. Not the legal resolution, not the court order or the stricken deed, but the specific fact that I am still here, still dispatching trucks, still paying my own bills on my own name, still going to work in the cold at 7:45 in the morning with a cup of coffee I got from the right Coney Island at the right price. I think she would look at me across her kitchen table and drink her coffee and nod in the small, steady way she nodded when something confirmed what she had already believed. She would not say she told me so. She was not a woman who said she told you so. She would just nod and drink her coffee and maybe reach across and put her hand on my hand for a second, the specific weight of her palm, and then she would say something about whatever needed doing next. There is always something that needs doing next. She taught me that before she taught me anything else. I was 8 years old when she made me come with her to the Flagstar Bank on East Jefferson, the same bank where I opened my savings account when I was 23. And she sat me down across from a bank officer and she said to the officer, "This is my daughter." And she explained what a savings account was and how interest worked and what compound meant when you were talking about money over time. The officer, a tired-looking woman in her 40s with a pen she kept taking apart and reassembling, looked at me and asked if I had any questions. I said, "How long does it take to get enough money to buy a house?" The officer looked at my mother. My mother looked at me. She said, "Depends on how long you work and how much you save and whether you make any mistakes that cost you big." She said, "And whether the people around you are honest." The officer reassembled her pen and said, "That pretty much covers it." I have thought about that conversation many times in the past 2 years, whether the people around you are honest. My mother said it the way you say a rule you know is true, not a wish, not an expectation, just a condition of the problem. She was not naive. She was a woman who had been a single mother in Detroit for 25 years and she knew the conditions of her problems. She told me the truth about the conditions. She just did not tell me that one of the conditions was sitting across the table from us at Sunday dinner. Or maybe she was still deciding whether to tell me. Maybe that was the conversation she was working up to that Sunday 3 weeks before she died over the coffee she let go cold. Maybe she had been watching Marcus for a while and had started to see the shape of what he was doing and was deciding whether to say it out loud to me, where saying it out loud would make it real and requiring of a response. Maybe she did not want to put that weight on me. Maybe she thought she had more time to decide. I will never know, and I have stopped asking myself to know. What I know is the calendar in the second drawer. What I know is the 32 years of night shifts. What I know is the red circle and the word done in capital letters. What I know is that she built something and I protected it, and the court record says so, and every document in the county file now says so, and the property at 14,812 Ardmore Street, Detroit, Michigan 48,227, is going to carry her name in its history for as long as the building stands. My mother was Dolores Jean Acaffer. She came to Detroit in 1988 with $40. She left behind a house worth $218,000, a scholarship fund at Osborne High School that has given out 3 awards since her death, a blue vase on Mrs. Pruitt's windowsill, and 2 children, one of whom is at the dispatch board at Great Lakes trucking on East McNichols every weekday morning at 7:45, moving things from yellow to green. That one is me. I want to say one more thing about the house before I stop. I have been back 3 times since January, once to check the heat, once to let a plumber in to look at a slow drain in the upstairs bathroom, and once just to sit in the kitchen for an hour on a Saturday morning with a cup of coffee from home in a travel mug. That last time I sat at the kitchen table where my mother had sat me down at 15 to explain amortization, and I looked at the counter where the coffee maker used to be, and I looked out the window at the backyard where the tiger lilies were coming up. This was in April, they were just starting, little points of green pushing up through last year's dead growth. I sat there and drank my coffee slowly, and I did not think about anything in particular. I just sat in the house my mother paid for, and I let it be what it was, which was mine and my brother's, which was the thing she left, which was enough. On the way out, I stopped in the bedroom and I opened the third drawer from the top on the left side, the one with the broken handle, gripping the bottom edge with my fingernails the way you have to, and I looked in it. There was nothing in it, just empty drawer. But I stood there with it open for a second and I thought, okay, I thought I will bring a screwdriver next time. I thought you have to replace the whole screw housing, not just the screw, because the housing stripped and a new screw in a stripped housing will not hold. I have looked this up. It is a 15-minute job. I have the part. I have had the part since February, sitting in a small plastic bag from a hardware store on East Warren. I just have not been back out there on the right day with the right amount of time. I will get there, everything in its times. My mother would understand that better than anyone. She always found her footing eventually, so do I. I have been asked since this whole thing became something people in my circle knew about, whether I feel angry. People ask it like it is a simple question with a simple answer. Deja asked it. My colleague Tanya on the dispatch floor asked it, delicately sideways, the way you ask something you are not sure you are allowed to ask. Aunt Cynthia asked it once and then answered it herself before I could respond. She said, "I know you do, I know you must." People seem to need me to be angry on their behalf the way they need a story to have a villain who is purely villainous, uncomplicated by love or memory. The truth is more like this. The thing that lives in my chest when I think about what Marcus did is not hot. It is not the kind of anger you raise your voice with, not the kind that makes you want to put something through a wall or say the thing that cannot be unsaid. It is a cold thing, low and settled, the kind of thing you carry without showing. I know how to carry it. I have been carrying versions of it my whole life. I carried it the morning I was 17 and I sat at the kitchen table eating cereal while my mother circled that payment in red, and I thought, good, and then I thought, he will find a way to use this somehow, and then I pushed that thought down because it was not a thought I wanted to have. I was 17. You do not want to have that thought about your own brother at 17. You want to believe better. She believed better her whole life. I believed better for longer than I should have. What I feel now in the place where I expect anger to be is something closer to clarity. Everything that was blurry about Marcus is now sharp. Everything I told myself might be different, might soften, might resolve itself into the person he was almost capable of being, that is over. I am not grieving it. I passed through the grieving of it somewhere between Brenda's parking lot and Patricia's conference room, and I did not notice exactly when because grief does not always announce itself. You just turn around one day, and the thing you were grieving is behind you instead of in front of you, and you are facing something else. What I am facing now is just my life. My dispatch board and my Flagstar savings account and my apartment on Chalmers Street and the house on Ardmore that I half own and will figure out what to do with when Marcus and I can both stand in a room with a notary and have a conversation that is at least minimally honest. I do not know when that will be. I am not working toward it. I am letting it come to me when it is ready to come to me. The way you let certain things come instead of chasing them, because chasing them costs you more than they are worth. What I am not facing is the version of my life where Marcus drained my mother's house of its equity and walked away clean. That version does not exist. Patricia Holt and Brenda at the title desk and the forensic document examiner Dr. Constance Faber and the Honorable Sandra Watkins of Wayne County Circuit Court all made sure of that. I made sure of that when I drove to Great Lakes Title on a Tuesday afternoon and sat across from Brenda and looked at my name on a document I had not signed and wrote the name, Philip Graves, on the back of a gas receipt, and drove home and looked up Wayne County property records until midnight. I made sure of that. My mother's house is still my mother's house, and it is still mine. There is a detail I have not told you yet. I did not tell it earlier because it did not fit the shape of the story as it was moving, but I want to tell it now because it is true and it matters. The night before the court hearing in September, I drove to Ardmore after my shift ended. I let myself in. I went to the bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed with the blue and white quilt, and I opened the second drawer of the bureau and I took out the calendar and I set it on my knees. I looked at the red circle for a long time. I looked at the word done. Then I took out the construction paper birthday card I had made in second grade and I held it in my other hand. I held them both, one in each hand, for about 10 minutes. Then I put them both back in the drawer and I closed it and I drove home. I do not know exactly why I did that. I have an idea. I think I needed to be in that room with those two things before I walked into that courtroom the next morning. I think I needed to know they were still there, that nothing had happened to them, that the drawer was still holding what it was supposed to hold. I think I needed to carry that knowledge into the courtroom the way you carry something important in a pocket, something small enough to fit in your hand, but solid enough that you can feel it when you close your fingers. I was carrying it when I sat down at the plaintiff's table. I was carrying it when Judge Watkins walked in. I was carrying it through the entire proceeding. And when she granted the motion and voided the fraudulent documents and confirmed the ownership and recorded it all in the official court record of Wayne County, Michigan, I did not feel triumphant. I felt the weight in my pocket become real. That is all. That is the whole story. I am 31 years old. My name is on a deed. My mother's house is still her house. The tiger lilies come up in the spring. I dispatch trucks on the east side of Detroit and I do it well, and I go home at the end of my shift and I make dinner and I pay my own bills. The court records say what they say, and my mother, if she is somewhere that allows for awareness of these things, which I neither fully believe nor fully disbelieve, my mother is nodding in that small, steady way and drinking her coffee and saying to whoever is sitting across from her, "That is my daughter. That is exactly what I taught her." I know she is, I know she is. I keep coming back to the moment Brenda called me. I have replayed it hundreds of times, not to stay in the shock of it, but because there is something in it that I find instructive. She had a job to do. She was verifying ownership before a closing. She found an anomaly in the filing sequence, too many transactions too fast, and instead of letting it pass, instead of deciding it was not her problem, she called the number on the co-owner's file and she waited for me to answer. She did not have to do that. She could have proceeded with the refinance and let someone else sort out the problems later. She did not. She called. There are Brendas in every story like this, people who are positioned to see what others do not see, who are not involved and do not have to get involved, who make the call anyway. I think about the clerk at the county registry office who processed the recording of the fraudulent deed, who had no reason to look twice at a notarized signature from a registered notary. I think about the Midwest Fidelity mortgage loan officer who processed the first loan against a property that had just transferred through probate and presumably saw my name on the title and did not contact me. I think about all the people in the chain of these transactions who had a moment where they could have looked harder and did not. And then I think about Brenda, who looked harder. I sent her a card. After the court hearing, after the records were corrected, I went to a drugstore on East Warren and bought a plain thank you card, nothing fancy, and I wrote in it that she had made a call that she did not have to make and that it had meant the difference, and I was grateful. I mailed it to the Great Lakes title address on 8 Mile. I do not know if she received it. I do not know if she is still working at that office. I know I sent it because it needed to be sent. There is a woman named Tamara who lives in East Point with a personal protection order against Marcus from 2019. I do not know Tamara well. I met her twice, briefly, at family gatherings before things between her and Marcus deteriorated. She has a son, Marcus's son, who is 7 years old and whose name I know but will not use here because he has done nothing to be discussed in a story about his father. What I know about Tamara is that she has been raising that boy on her own with limited support, and that the court-ordered child support that Marcus was supposed to be paying has been inconsistently paid at best, and the shortfalls have been documented in the Macomb County family court records. I know this because Deja told me, in the context of understanding what Marcus might have been spending borrowed money on. I do not feel responsible for any of this. I want to say that clearly. I did not cause Marcus to become who he is. I did not fail to stop him. I was not the person positioned to stop him in any of the places where he needed stopping. The people positioned to stop him were a mortgage company and a private lender and a notary who did not ask hard enough questions. And then they were a circuit court judge who did stop him, finally, on record, in a courtroom on St. Antone Street on a Thursday morning in September 2023. But I think about the boy in East Point sometimes. I think about whether in 20 years he will have questions about his father. I think about whether the legal record, which is public, will be part of how he comes to understand who Marcus is. I hope it helps. I hope it is one piece of a larger picture that eventually makes sense to him. I hope someone is there to help him understand that your father's choices are not your choices and that a name you share is not a fate you inherit. My mother understood this. She watched her own mother make choices she did not repeat. She watched her first marriage fall apart when I was 6, and she chose differently after that, chose herself, chose the house, chose the night shifts, chose to be the kind of woman who circles a mortgage payment in red on a calendar and writes the word done and keeps the calendar in a drawer for 30 years because it represents something true. I am her daughter. I am 31 years old. My name is Renata Marie Ackefer, and the house at 14,812 Ardmore Street, Detroit, Michigan, is exactly where it is supposed to be. The handle on the third drawer is still broken. I have the part. I will get there.